What's up, everybody? It's Nick Atkin on the South China Morning Post, SCMP MMA in Hong Kong. I'm delighted to be joined by the legendary Rich Franklin over in his home in Cincinnati, over in the States. What is going on, Rich? Thank you so much for joining me.
Hey, it's a pleasure being on. Thank you so much for having me on here, man.
Yeah, I mean, I was just checking where you were in the world because I see you jet setting all the time. You were in Singapore not too long ago, commentating with ONE Championship. But I know you ventured back to the States to try and help ONE land their first ever American show. Could you tell us a little bit about how all of that process is going and what you've been doing, where you've been going?
Yeah, actually, jet setting's been a bit more difficult since COVID kicked off, right? I was originally running the ONE Warrior series for ONE Championship, traveling and recruiting talent, and actually bouncing back to the U.S. at this point in time has become quite difficult. So I've always had my home here in the United States. I've been stationed over in Singapore for the last 4.5, almost 5 years now. But I needed to get home for some personal stuff. However, since we had our events back in April on Turner and TNT here in the U.S., those were actually broadcast from Singapore. That was our first foray into the U.S. market. And so now we're looking at actually doing events here in the United States. So since I was here, I came here for some personal reasons. Actually, a blessing in disguise. God works in mysterious ways, I guess you could say. And I'm over here working with states on approval and sanctioning for the Global Ruleset that ONE Championship uses.
Yes, this is kind of what I wanted to talk to you about as well, because it's been approved in Colorado, I believe, and Chatri also told me recently in an interview it's multiple states have approved this rule set. So it might not just be Colorado we see, but is that the likely first state that we might see a ONE Championship show on American soil?
I would say it's probably the likely first state. They're the first state that gave us full carte blanche approval. I do have several other states and several of the cities that we have the ability to do events in. So yeah, we should have, depending on how our schedule looks next year, we're still finishing out this year, obviously. And then we're looking at how we're building our schedule for next year. But I would say that on the back end of 2022, we'll look at more than likely going to several cities here in the United States. That's pretty exciting.
Yeah, everyone's been asking, when is the show going to happen? And I don't think Chatri knew precisely when I asked him. He was saying maybe the 10th anniversary would have been there. Well, it turns out that's going to be in Singapore. But you're saying it's still probably a year away, so late 2022.
Yeah, I would say Q3, Q4. This is me just speculating a little bit. We haven't laid anything out, so please don't hold me to that or anything. But yeah, it's been difficult with you understand how things are on that side of the planet, right? Singapore is very strict with their COVID protocols, border restrictions. A lot of the countries over there, Vietnam, Thailand, they've all been hesitant to open things back up for even minimal travel, let alone being able to travel in with. I mean, think about the number of employees that you have to bring into a country in order to hold an event, not even including the number of athletes and all those kinds of things before you even get into the crowd. So these are major undertakings, and that's obviously complicated things for us doing events in Singapore. You can see that as we're doing the events there in Singapore, the stadium still is not filled. Because these are the COVID protocols that the country of Singapore has in place. So we adhere to these kinds of things, and obviously safety is our first priority. But yeah, and this is it has an effect on our schedule and whatnot. So this is made us have to think outside the box and do what we need to do. But yeah, we'll be looking at the back half of the year, Q3, Q4 next year for doing events here in the U.S. I'm guessing maybe Q2.
Well, I look forward to it. I can't wait to see it. And I know I also wanted to get your thoughts. This is something I think you probably want to talk about because, Marc Ratner has been talking about having consistency among athletic commissions. He wants the rules to be the same in every state. I think I can share the article here. It's from MMA Junkie. They read it up. But yeah, I mean, what have you thought of Marc's comments here? I think specifically regarding, Colorado approving ONE Championships rules, the global rule set. He said, I would tell the world that we're the UFC not going there. I would tell the governor we would love to come to Colorado, but you have to have the right rules. I'm against that. There's no reason to have those rules. I don't understand why they would do that. I think, knees to grounded opponents specifically is what he's against. But yeah, I mean, what did you think of Marc's comments?
Yeah, I think that okay, first of all, I agree with Mark. I do think that we should look at having some consistency with the rule set on the one hand, but on the other hand, I don't know if it's necessary. You take different sports, for example, you look at American football. I mean, the NFL uses a certain set of rules, but when you go to Canada, the Canadian Football League uses a slightly different set of rules. It's still football, but if you understand the game of American football, then you'll understand that there are slight nuanced differences between these two sports. So does it matter that the rules are the same? Not really. In MMA, does it matter? Between organizations, not really. But I think the primary concern here is fighter safety, and that's what everybody should be looking at. There aren't that many organizations globally who have the kind of track records that, say, ONE Championship or even the UFC does, for that matter. And so you have to assess the things that keep the fighter safe and the things that make the fighters, like, they put the fighters in more danger. Obviously, people are going to focus in on the knees to the head on the ground because we allow that. I would, from not only an athlete's perspective, but from an executive's perspective, argue, can you really prove that you can generate more force to the head, or that you're more vulnerable on the ground if you get kneed in the head than you could, for example, if you're standing? I mean, I've been kneed in the face before, and when somebody throws a knee at your face and they can also grab the back of your head and pull your head down, which is completely legal, you're generating momentum in two different directions, only amplifying the amount of force to the intended target. And to me, that seems more dangerous. It seems like I believe that I could probably generate more force to the head of a standing opponent while I'm standing than I could to somebody who's grounded. Now, we could debate that all day long, and that doesn't matter. But really, if you want to look for consistency in rule sets, you got to start thinking about fighter safety. And when I look at the other aspects of ONE Championship's rule sets, Fight Week CT scans that we require, not only do we require, but we provide and actually front the cost of that for all of our athletes. That's a big undertaking to put into a fight week. You have so many other things going on, media obligations, photo shoots, video shoots, all the stuff, PCR testing now, like all these different protocols and things that you have during fight week. And we add in Fight Week CT scans. The belief is that athletes could have possibly suffered head trauma between the time that they were tested with a previous CT scan. That's part of every major organization's medical records, like some sort of head scan, CTs, MRIs, whatever they require, and before the fight. So if you're a week out of the fight and you were sparring with one of your partners and got clipped, we want to know about it because that puts you at danger. And so that's one of the things that we do to keep athletes safe. I think another thing that's a big talking point for ONE Championship's rule set is our hydration protocols. We're looking at a landscape of athletes. And when I think about the United States, I really believe that these commissions in the various states should start looking at the hydration protocols that ONE Championship uses and start assessing that across the board, because we've seen other organizations where athletes are collapsing on stage, collapsing on the scales, reports of athletes that are being carted off to the hospital, fights that are in jeopardy of not taking place because of weigh-ins and whatnot. So when you're looking at things like that, I'm like, yeah, should there be some consistency? Sure. For athlete safety, if no other reason. I just happen to believe that ONE Championship's rule set is superior in that particular category. And, then I start looking at different things like our judging criteria, the way that we score matches. We don't judge on the 10-point must system. I personally believe that for MMA, particularly 3-round MMA matches, that the 10-point must system is flawed. And everybody knows that anybody who's familiar with our rule set knows that we judge the fight in its entirety as if it's just one big round. So you don't have the ability to steal a round or squeak out round 1 and round 2 and then get blown out in round 3, but still win the match because you round 1 2-1. When the second round begins in our scoring criteria, that's just the 6th minute of the fight, continuing until the very end, whether it's 15 minutes or 25 based on the number of rounds. So, on one hand, I agree with Mark. And if we're looking at fighter safety, then we should look for some consistency. And I think that these athletic commissions in the various states should take a serious look at ONE Championship's rules and protocols.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there, and I do want to pick your brains on each aspect there that you've mentioned. I guess starting first with hydration testing, because a lot of people criticize this and they say, fighters are still finding ways to get around it. And I think even when John Wayne Parr was struggling to make weight for his debut in ONE, he was saying, or someone commented, a fight dietitian or a nutritionist commented on his Instagram saying, there are ways to get around it. Just hit me up in my DMs. I'll tell you. What are these ways? Do you think there are ways? Is that just bullshit? Is it bonkers? If
there are ways, I don't know how to get around it. Look, Look, for any system, I'm sure there's some sort of way to cheat, right? I mean, these things exist. So how that could exist for a hydration protocol, I'm not really sure. I'm sure there are ways to do some sort of water loading and stuff like that. But still, at the end of the day, if you are trying to quote unquote get around the system, you can only get so far. You still, like when I was competing, when I was still in competition, I was cutting 25 pounds. At times, 11 kg, maybe 12 tops, but still 11 kg, that's a lot of weight to cut. And so even with the hydration system that we have in place, if you were finding ways to get around it, and I don't know how you could, then you're still not able to cut that kind of weight. It would be quite difficult because our hydration protocol requires the athletes to both test their urine and weigh in, both of these things, 2 days before the fight and 1 day before the fight. So the way the system works is that you come into, you show up, you pee in a cup. That urine is then tested for the specific gravity that urine is tested. It has to be below a certain limit. You're basically testing the amount of solvents that is in the urine, and the less you have, the more hydrated you are, in essence. And once you pee and you make hydration, then you step on the scale and your weight gets checked. Now you have to make hydration and weight simultaneously, 2 days before the fight and 1 day before the fight. If you miss either one of those things, you have to turn around and do both of them again on fight day. So when you look at a system like that, that's way more stringent than what the system that the NCAA implemented for their weigh-ins. Because they had back in the 90s, there were a couple of deaths that were associated with weight cutting and whatnot. So they implemented the system to protect the athletes from themselves. So that they do at the beginning of the season. We do this before every match. So, it's quite difficult to cheat a system like that.
And do you think, I think some people have concerns because they say, it's not transparent. We don't see the weigh-ins. We don't see the hydration test. It's all done behind closed doors. Do you see that argument with I know we had ceremonial weigh-ins for the last event, First Strike, but I can't remember seeing like live official weigh-ins and things like that. Is that something one might bring in the future?
Yeah, well, we actually started doing that prior to COVID. We were live streaming the weigh-ins.
Yeah, I remember now. Yeah,
but, on our Facebook, I believe we did that, and so there is transparency to it. And keep in mind, even though you don't see those things, I mean, the athletes do weigh in, and when two athletes weigh in, if I'm fighting, I have the ability to send a representative from my camp to witness the weigh-in and hydration of my opponent and sign off on it. Now, most of the athletes don't bother doing that, but they do have the ability to do that. That is in the rule set, and they're given that option. So, there is transparency between the camps for that kind of stuff, because we've had some athletes that have complained like, well, wait a minute, I'm not sure they made weight or they made hydration or whatever. It's like, your people could be there. Just like before a match, if you're getting your hands wrapped and you want a representative from your camp to watch somebody else getting their hands wrapped, it is possible. I would say at this point in time, for example, broadcasting those weigh-ins and the hydration protocol is a bit difficult for us because of the COVID protocols that we have in place in Singapore. There are limited numbers of people that you can have in rooms and stuff like that. And so that's kind of created complications for us. But yeah, we've tried to keep as much transparency about that as possible. And I think that any of the fans who don't get to see it, the one thing that they should know is that athletes from opposing camps do have the ability to witness their opponents weighing in, or at least send a representative, so they don't have to do it personally, but a representative from their camp to witness the weigh-in and hydration of their opponents.
And I think there was a little bit of controversy. Someone wrote, I think it was MMA Fighting, brought up an instance where Angela Lee fought Istela Nunes, 2017. I'm not sure if you were with the company then, but
I was.
Yeah. So Istela, who just fought in the UFC, she lost to Kana Lossi on the weekend. She said she's alleging that Angela missed weight, and then she had to fight Angela. The one made her fight. Do you have any reaction to that? Have you ever seen any instances where fighters have missed weight and won, and it's not been publicly acknowledged? I just wanted to get your thoughts.
Yeah. Well, let me address the Istela case first. First of all, Estela's her comments. She talked about Angela Lee missing weight, and she was talking about them fighting at straw weight, and she said that Angela weighed 128. Now, this was back in 2017. Keep in mind, first of all, that her recollection of all that is incorrect, because that fight was not at straw weight; it was at atom weight. So they had to weigh in at 150 pounds. I do know that Angela struggled to make weight that time, but she did make weight and we allow a 200 gram allowance on our weigh-ins. And so she did make weight for that fight, and she did make hydration as well. So Istela had the ability, again, to send somebody from her camp to witness that kind of stuff. But however, her recollection of that and what she had actually stated in the article wasn't accurate because she was talking about the wrong weight class. So I don't know exactly what she was talking about. As far as athletes making weight and making hydration, to date, I'll say this, and I believe this is still an accurate stat. We've never lost a match due to someone not making hydration. In the global rule set, you don't have the ability to miss hydration. If you miss hydration, you cannot fight. If you miss weight, you can fight, and that fight can be negotiated at catch weight. Now, there are parameters as to how far over you can be. Like I couldn't come in and miss weight by like 15 pounds and say, oh, well, I missed weight, but I'm hydrated, so let's go ahead and negotiate this at a catch weight. There are parameters. There's maximum percentages over the allowed weight limit, and then that's then negotiated with the opponent. The opponent has to accept the fight, and then the opponent is given a percentage of the purse from the fighter who missed weight. So there are systems in place where if you do miss weight, then you can fight at catch weight. And we do have matches that from time to time happen where people miss weight. There are a lot of athletes that come in that are on the border of that weight, that weight class. The interesting thing about cutting weight is that there's a psychology with the athletes. Even myself, when I was competing the whole time, it's like, well, if I can cut weight and come in and I'm just a few pounds heavier than my opponent, then I'll have an advantage. And so you find these athletes who are, stretching those limits. They're at the upper limits of a weight class and trying to just, play that game of like, maybe I can cut a pound type of thing or whatever, or two or whatever. I don't know. I've never actually even tried to cut weight while staying hydrated and testing the specific gravity of my urine. I wouldn't even know how it would work. But yeah, so there is the occasional time where, an athlete's coming in, maybe they're holding water from the plane. Maybe they overate that week. Maybe they overate the week before. Maybe they miscued and they came in a pound heavy or something like that. And so that does happen, but then those fights are negotiated to catch weights.
Well, there was some things you mentioned a while ago I just wanted to bring back to. You talked about the CT tests. I think Denise Zamboanga said after her fight with Ham Shohi, she had actually got knocked out in sparring a couple of weeks before the fight. And so she would have had to have passed the test right before that fight, and it would have been clear. I mean, she did go to the doctor in Thailand, she said, where she trains, and she was given the all clear there. But could you just tell people a little bit more about those procedures in ONE?
Yeah, I mean, if she got knocked out, I don't know if it didn't pick up on the CT scan or whatever, but during fight week, once all the athletes arrive, they are at some point during the fight week, it's scheduled in to transport all of them to a hospital or medical facility where their heads are checked for CT scans, and they look for whatever things like, even tumors and stuff like that. Even when I was running the ONE Warrior Series in that organization, we did the same thing for ONE Warrior Series. This is not an inexpensive endeavor, to say the least, particularly for a smaller show like the Warrior Series that I was doing. And there were several catches that we had with athletes who showed up and was like, no, we see, spots here that are, I'm not an expert on the head like that, but there were, markers that were shown that said like, you cannot compete. And we had to pull some of our athletes off the card last minute. So these things do happen. We have had athletes both in ONE Championship and, like ONE Warrior Series. I had personal experience with it where athletes were pulled off the card. So if Denise did get a zinger or, catch something, maybe a mild concussion or something like that, whatever ended up happening to her in training, and I don't know about any of that because I didn't see her comments, she still would have had to pass the CT scan during fight week.
Yeah, I think she said it was because she trains only with men out in Maroc force in Bangkok, and she says they treat me like a man, so that they don't hold back, and they hit her hard in sparring, she was saying, and she got accidentally clipped. Yeah, but it seems like she was okay.
Yeah, you can still train smart though, and I'm not saying that Denise wasn't training smart, but I during my career as an athlete, I came from the school of hard knocks. Like I probably like put my body through more abuse than was necessary. Let's put it that way.
Well, and one other thing I wanted to bring back from earlier was just you mentioned the judging criteria, because there's been a bit of controversy lately. We've had a couple of decisions, including that one, Denise and Ham, and then Christian Lee and Okrayun. Decisions which then prompted formal reviews by ONE's competition committee. Both results were upheld, but a lot of fans, particularly of Denise, and have been angry at the rules, railing, saying Denise won. is it a fact that maybe the fans don't understand there's a different type of judging criteria which prioritizes damage, which prioritizes going for the finish, near finishes? But then on the flip side, you could see Christian Lee's argument that he did do those things, but the judges didn't give it his way. What is your take on this?
Yeah, I mean, well, listen, there's not going to be any perfect system. Even myself in the 10-point must system, like I've suffered what I believe are really, really bad decisions. You go back and look at the scorecards in the Dan Henderson match. Two of the judges scored that 29-28, and then one of them in favor of Dan, and one of them scored at 30-27 in favor of me. Now, you have three judges sitting around a cage, and that means that you have three different people seeing this match. It's from three different perspectives, and one of them saw that I won all three rounds. So how something like that happens, I don't know. I don't particularly believe that perhaps is a flaw in the 10-point must system. This is just the way that three different judges happen to see the match. So, keep in mind, judges are watching these things live. And even myself, like I've gone back and reviewed these matches. And when I see a match that like when I look at a match, sometimes when you're watching things on camera, I have the ability to slow a match down to half speed and see like, okay, this punch did actually land. But when you're sitting around cage side, you might be behind a fighter and not be able to tell if that punch landed, not score that punch, or you might be on the other side of a fighter and tell that the punch did land and score the punch. And your angle could change what kind of scoring or, how you mark things down on your score sheets for the entire match. So, everybody's going to have their opinion. And both of those matches were very, very close fights. And I think that on either side, people could make a case that Oak won that match, and people could make a case that they believe that Christian won that match. And the same with Denise as well. And so it's not like when I look at those matches, I don't see those decisions and think like, wow, that's a terrible decision. How did that happen?
Okay. Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I think we haven't seen any ridiculous decisions. I think this system makes it a little bit better in that regard. I did also want to ask you, Rich, about Turner, the deal. Do you have any update on whether ONE is going to resign with Turner? I know Chatri said that you were looking at other networks in America.
That is not something that I handle for ONE Championship. So I'm so busy with the commission stuff that that's being handled by somebody else. So I honestly couldn't speak to that and give you accurate information. So I'll let you bring somebody else that's working on that aspect of ONE Championship and go from there.
Well, maybe you could tell me this, though. Do you have an update on when we might get the Warrior series back? Because, a lot of people love that show. It's been a while since we've seen it. It's sorely missed.
Well, listen, first of all, I appreciate that. I had a lot of fun shooting that show, both the actual travel aspect of the show, traveling around and recruiting the talent, as well as the fights that we put on. And that show for me was bittersweet and I mean that in the sweet sense, because, I have the ability to recruit these athletes, and I'm going to give out contracts for, the athletes that win contracts into ONE Championship. And for every success story you see, you're going to see a dozen athletes that don't end up getting that contract. And all the people that I recruited, like when you travel around and meet these athletes, meet their families, become emotionally invested in them, like you're really rooting for these people. And so if somebody doesn't succeed, it's tough. But I'll tell you, I'm truly blessed to have done that show. I don't know when that's going to come back, because we're just now getting to a point where travel is starting to open back up internationally. But the ability to travel internationally in large groups with a production crew and those kinds of things still are yet to be seen. So, I'm not really sure how to speculate on when that might actually come back. I think that depends on a lot of international governments.
And what about your commentating? I enjoyed the 3-man booth with Chivello and Dragon and Rich. Would you like to get back in there with those guys soon?
I do enjoy the commentating. I love being in there. Of course, Mitch and I are always doing this. That's just good. That's just good fun banter between the two of us. We do get along in real life. Honestly, he may secretly hate my guts, wink, wink. But but no, I do have fun in the commentary booth with him. I'm just geographically not in Singapore at the moment working on this kind of stuff. So if I was in Singapore, I would immediately jump back in the booth because I have a good time doing that. I like analyzing the fights and giving the breakdowns at the end of the round.
All right. And I got to just quickly get your predictions for NextGen, which is coming up October 29th, next Friday in Singapore. One of your guys from the Warrior series, I think, Lito Adewang against Jared Brooks. Is that right?
It is.
Yeah. So how do you see that one going?
Come on, man! You can't ask me to go against my boy Lito. Lito's one of my favorite recruits, man. So even if my head went the other direction, which I don't think it does, my heart would still have to go with him. So definitely pulling for Lito on that. But all kidding aside, though, Jared, this is a tough matchup for Lito. This is a big step up. And Jared's a serious contender here. So this one should be really exciting. And these two guys have had some words to say to each other as well, right? Like they've had some a bit of exchange online. And I think that Lito at this point in time feels like Jared has kind of disrespected not only him, but Team Mackay as well.
All right. Could I also get a prediction quickly from you? Sorry, for the Grand Prix semifinals, which are going to be Julie Mizababa against Stamp Fairtex and Ritu Foga against Etsuki Hirata.
Oh man, all these predictions. Well, first of all, Stamp and Julie. So Julie actually came into the organization right before COVID kicked off. We were set to travel to the United States and Brazil to recruit talent for the first time to the other side of the planet. And Julie was one of the athletes that I had zeroed in on. Really cool story. With her, single mom, raising her kid, fighting, and I mean literally like life is a fight. Small business owner and stuff like that. Exciting. Like she looked really good in the first round of this tournament, and she's had some things to say about Stamp concerning like. Stamp's a great stand-up fighter, but this is not Muay Thai. This is MMA. So Julie plans on bringing it to Stamp. This obviously Stamp came into ONE Championship through the ONE Warrior Series. She's somebody that I discovered as well. So I guess you could say I'm emotionally invested in both of these girls. And honestly, I don't look for that one to go to the ground. I think both of them are going to make a point. Stamp felt a little disrespected about Julie's comments concerning her stand-up, so that should be pretty interesting. I think that the Ritu Fogat and Hirata match is quite an interesting match because this is the first time for me that I'm seeing Ritu compete against somebody who is what I believe is a higher skill level on the ground. So I'm wondering if she's actually going to be able to hold Hirata down like she has other opponents before. Because if Hirata is able to stuff several of the takedowns, and if she ends up on the ground and gets back to her feet, this could be a long night for Ritu. We've seen Ritu stand up it's improved significantly. I'm just not sure it's on the level of being able to just keep this fight standing with Hirata the whole time. So it'll be interesting to see how that ends up playing out.
ONE Championship X 10th anniversary show on December 5th, I believe, in Singapore. Can't wait. And also NextGen, October 29th. I'm sure you'll be watching both, Rich.
Oh yeah, I definitely tune into those. I'm still, even though I'm not in the commentary booth, I'm always kind of giving the commentators feedback and sending messages in. So I'm there in spirit, or I guess there in the non-physical realm. I don't know however you want to put that, but yeah, I'll definitely be watching but I'll be watching the events as a fan as well. So, I'm there in both capacities.
All right. Well, look, yeah, thank you so much again. It's been really great to chat to you. I appreciate all the insights you've given on ONE's criteria and all the system, the hydrations and everything. It was a very, very interesting chat.
Hey, great conversation, man. Appreciate you having me on.
Thank you. Yeah.
Time.